Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone, especially all the early birds. You know what, producer, let's give some shout outs to the early birds that joined the stream. But thanks to everyone that showed up. I'm absolutely grateful for that. So while she's doing that, I want to introduce you all to a new segment that we call Throwback Thursday TikTok. Say that 10 times real fast. Throwback Thursday TikTok. Throwback. I don't even know why I tried. That's tough. So, this segment is where we're going to share some of our most well received TikToks from back in the day. And by back in the day, I just mean a few months ago. Time flies with technology. So if you don't follow us on TikTok, you could find us at VS Code. And the same videos are actually shorts on YouTube's at youtube.com/code. And both of those links are in the video description, so you could reference them there. So I've got two videos this episode that I want to share with you guys. So without further delay, throwback.
So I worked on some pretty exciting things this sprint. Nothing to demo per se, but I did refactor the entire back end to get us up to date with modern security standards. I created a custom search algorithm and shaved 5 whole seconds off of our load time.
Only 5 seconds?
Anywho, so I think you guys are really going to like this. I censored the image on our welcome page and changed the font from purple to blue.
Are you kidding me? Or
Gotta give the people what they want.
what the?
Hey, Ronald. Hey, Kevin. What's the word? What's the word? Thunderbird. I love saying that. Yeah. Look, I noticed you pushed some code into production. Wasn't ready. No, I didn't. I pushed the staging. Exactly. That's production. No, but that's staging. Our staging is production. And the server called production, well, that's staging. What about dev? That's development. What else would it be? Dev, development? All right. Well, there you go. Throwback Thursday TikTok. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And I'm pretty sure some of you could relate to that last video. So moving along, all right, our show today is going to be about debugging in Visual Studio Code. Now, you know, debugging is one of the most important skills you need to have as a developer because we all make mistakes in coding and need to figure out what went wrong. And our guest is going to share some information and demonstrations to help us become better debuggers, to help us refine our art in debugging. Because really, it kind of is an art. You have to kind of be creative to become really efficient and good at it. And the better you are at debugging, the better developer you are. So to get started, let's welcome our guest all the way from Israel, Tom Grenade.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem, Tom.
Was that applause? Like, did I get applause in the
Yes.
background?
Yeah, they're
Yes.
applauding for you.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool.
So, Tom, go ahead and tell us what you got to show for us today.
Right. So we'll do a model and debugging tutorial in VS Code. We'll explore a couple of baked-in options for debugging right inside VS Code itself. And then we're going to show Lightrun, the tool, this direction. my company's building that has a VS Code plugin inside of it, and we'll kind of compare the pros and cons of each approach for like a modern debugging scenario.
Nice, nice, nice. And just before we even jump into it, could you tell us a little bit how you even got into the space, specifically with debugging?
Sure. So Lightrun is actually a developer observability platform. We have a bunch of tools that enable developers to better understand and debug their applications. I got into developer relations kind of by accident. I was a site reliability engineer, and I was kind of on the, I don't know, the bound.
Oh, he paused there for a second, but I'm sure we'll get him back. Mabuela, I'll send him your message that you said welcome. And Quasi, thank you. I'm not sure which part is funny, but I appreciate that you're enjoying it so far. So our producers are checking in to see why is internet froze up. But in the meanwhile, I am going to interact with you guys into the chat. All right. So I know we've said hello to a few people already. Tell me, you guys, how do you guys feel about your strength in your debugging skills, your debugging karate chops, from a scale of 1 to 10? Drop your number in there. Kind of want to like get a measure of like how you guys measure up, and then gonna follow up with like some questions that you might want to ask, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. Because as soon as Tom comes back, I'm going to try to drop your questions into him. So go ahead. A 7. Alan Paul Razero says a 7. All right, cool. By the way, don't you guys hate like when recruiters ask you the questions? Rate yourselves from like a 1 to 10, and you're like wondering, like, should I really be honest and say I'm a 7 because a 10 is like someone that knows everything? I always felt like that was a trick question. Kevin Foreman has an 8. All right. Jay McCormick, 10. Okay. Hey, Tom. Sorry about the technical difficulties. This is live. This is how we do it here.
Yeah, I know. I apologize sincerely. I swapped Wi-Fi network, so I hope it will be better now. Can you hear me well?
Oh, okay. Yes, I could hear you fine. I thought you meant you swapped
All right.
Wi-Fi during the broadcast. I was gonna be like, oh no, I don't think that's a good idea.
No, that's not a good idea, and that's not what I did at all. No. Just switch Wi-Fi's right now when the Wi-Fi collapsed or something.
All right,
All right.
cool.
So maybe I'll carry on from the last point of
Yes,
the
absolutely.
question.
Let's continue.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. Thank you for staying put. I hope you stayed put. I can't actually see the numbers, but I do hope you're still here.
Yeah.
So I was on the boundary of development and DevOps as a site reliability engineer for a factory data platform, for a factory software data platform thingy. And when I got wind of Lightrun, the product my company is building, I immediately kind of saw the value for troubleshooting and debugging, because I wish I had that. And I joined pretty early, right after seed, and been here ever since. Done a bunch of things in the company, and ended up finding myself in developer advocacy of all things, which I am very thankful for. It's a great kind of position to be in. So that's me.
That sounds awesome. Well, without any further ado, why don't we go ahead and check out the demonstration that you'd like to show us?
Definitely. So Peggy, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. And I am going to now start working. Just let me know once you see my screen.
Yeah, Peggy's our producer, folks, just in case you thought he mispronounced my name.
Oh, no. Yes, that's definitely, that would be a very weird mispronunciation, wouldn't it?
Hey, I've gotten worse.
All right, so can you all see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. So I'm
Everyone,
going,
let us know if we need to increase the font, but so far, so good.
Excellent. So to give you a little bit of sense of what we're going to do today, we're going to do a play in 3 acts, if you will. The first part, or the first act, is going to be us debugging a real live application. It's a game called Wordle. You probably all know it. So we'll debug a small bug inside that game, and we'll do it again in 3 acts. The first one we'll use VS Code's baked-in remote development capabilities to try and start to debugging the application over SSH. Then we'll move over to the kind of the counter approach. We'll disconnect from the remote machine directly, move back to the local machine, and use the remote debugging capabilities of VS Code for Node.js to try and understand what's going on. And finally, we'll check out Lightrun, which is, again, the tool my company is developing to do what we call live debugging, which is kind of a different approach to remote debugging. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this table is because there's a bunch of different kind of pros, cons, different things that happen inside this debugging process. I'm not actually going to go through the full table now because I am going to talk about each of these things while I'm working on the application.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of very slowly and casually try and walk you through the process. So I think the questions can be asked during the presentation. I actually prefer it. Please ask them if there's anything that you want to ask. And let's do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open my terminal and I'm going to run the Wordle game on a remote machine. I'm going to do it right now. Sorry, folks, one moment. I think that because of the Wi-Fi change, I might have lost connectivity to my SSH session. So I'm going to reconnect right now. One moment.
I'm not sure if there's a quick way to increase your font. I know like on a Mac, there's Control plus, but if you can when you get a chance, that'd be cool. Getting a couple of requests for that.
All right. So I'm sorry, folks. I think that because of the Wi-Fi change, I might have a little bit of a problem with my VPN. So if you will wait one moment, apologies for that. I'm going to try and swap Wi-Fi networks again to see whether it works or not. And I'll be back in just.
All right. So, and I'll remind him also about the increasing of the font. I know sometimes what looks good on your monitor might not be like the best for everyone else. So Pius, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I got your request, so don't worry about that. So, yeah, this is pretty cool. By the way, I hope you guys like the new intro that we have. We're trying a couple of new things here. So we have that new intro, and then we had the segment that I talked to you about, and then another quick new little segment that we're going to do later on also. So anything that stands out that you see that's different, that you like, or you're like, nah, just drop that in the chat because we're going to bounce off your feedback to keep like refining the show to make it as engaging and as interesting as possible for you. So I will appreciate that feedback. Don't hold back. I know some people hesitate to like give suggestions, but then there's others that's not. I was like, whoa, okay. They're real honest. So that's cool. Has anybody here done any type of work that's specifically related to just debugging? Drop a 1 if so, where like the core of your job is just fixing other people's problems.
Right. Hi, folks. I apologize sincerely. There seems to be some sort of internet connectivity issue on my end that prevents me to connect to the VPN machine that I'd like to demonstrate with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick kind of improvisation, if you will, and I'm going to try and run a similar flow, just run it on my local machine, and we'll see what happens. This is exciting. Demo time is always kind of an exciting period of time. So let's try and do it now. All right?
All right, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so I'm now connected, and I'm going to share my screen because you can't see it, I think, again. I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, all right, we're going to do that one more time. So just to kind of clarify what I was about to do, and I am not going to do right now because it's a bit difficult without having connectivity, is try and do a debugging over SSH session. I'm going to try it one more time, see if it works. If not, I'm going to skip that part and jump directly over to the debugging capabilities inside VS Code. And then I'm going to try and do the live debugging, just running with a local version instead of a remote version, if that's okay. So again, apologies for this. Connectivity issues on my end. Let's try and do it. So luckily, I created an SSH session for a public IP that is the same machine running remotely. Awesome. So now I have a public IP instead of a private IP, and I think I can try and do the same thing I wanted to do. Let's see if it works. All right, so it looks as if I have a Wordle app running on localhost 3006. Now, notice that it's not actually 3006 because it's running on a remote session. So this will be here. And let's see if it works. All right, there you go. All right, so this is, let's see. So I come prepared. Yes, I like the applause. Awesome, that's very cool. All right.
Looking promising.
So, looking promising indeed. Let's see what happens here. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the application in front of me and tell you what it is. I'm kind of just saying obvious things now, so I'm going to go back to the flow if you don't mind. So this is a Node.js implementation of the game Wordle. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the game Wordle. It's pretty popular. New York Times just bought it. It's a game where you have to guess a word. There's a 5-letter game word that is being emitted during the std out run of the application. If you look here on the std out of the application, the game word is Mambo. What that means is that I have in each guess, I have to fill out 5 letters that comprise a guess word. Let's, for example, put in the word break, and I get feedback. That feedback is in the form of colored rectangles, gray, yellow, or green rectangles. If the rectangle is gray, that means that that letter is not in the game word. In the case of R, that makes sense because if the game word is Mambo, R is not Mambo, and it's correct. If I get a yellow rectangle, that means that the letter is in the word, but is not in the correct place. If I look at A here and I look back at the word Mambo, I can see that the 4th letter, the letter at index 3 in the array, is B, and the letter A is in that location, which means it does exist. It's the second word, letter, but it is in the wrong location. And if I get a green rectangle, that means that I have the same, the correct letter in the correct location. And then to win the game, quote unquote, what you have to do is you have to get 5 green rectangles, and then you win the game. That's it. So far, so good. Renald, you know the game, obviously, right?
Yes. And several of our audience members do also. Preet Pamar says she does that every day. She says, that's Wordle. I play it daily.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
and by the way,
definitely.
Someone said, hey, Nino says, Tom, I can help you debug your internet connection, so hit me up.
Very cool, very cool. So yeah, unfortunately, and this is I'll do an aside for everybody who's ever done a live demonstration. These things happen. It's fine. When you've been around for a long while, you know that this stuff happened. It's perfectly fine. Always come prepared, and if possible, have a plan B for when these things happen. All right, cool. Let's carry on. So the problem in the bug in the application starts when you try and guess a word like this. So if I guess the word March, what do I expect will happen? I expect that M and A will be colored green because the word, the game word is Mambo, which means that the letters M and A are in the correct location. This is obviously not the case. Because this is not the case, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to try and figure out a few different ways to understand why they are not colored green. This is obviously an application level problem. And I'm going to use VS Code to do so. So now that I have my brand new IP address that I can use for working with the application, I'm going to look at this IDE here. Now, if you notice, you can see that I am remote connected to a port, to an IP 172.3.1.3.1.182. This is the private IP from before. I'm going to try and swap it and add a new SSH host, which is the one I am currently on. And let's just see that it works. I think it's this one. Connect. And let's see that it works. Opening remote. And what I'm doing now is, for those of you not familiar with this flow, is I am running a remote code server, an actual version of VS Code on the remote machine. This is all part of the remote development workflow baked into Visual Studio Code. Now, the remote workflow basically puts a headless Visual Studio Code version called VS Code Server on the remote machine and connects my local GUI, this version of Visual Studio Code you're seeing in front of you, to that machine. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually open the application remotely, the application that I have running on the machine there. It's called, it's under the folder, sorry, Wordle. I'm going to click OK. Let's see what it gives. And the VS Code is going to load back up. And on the left-hand side, I have the exact same file tree, basically the file explorer, that is on the remote machine. Now, let's just see that it opens. Yes, I definitely trust all the people, for sure. It's my machine. So if I look on the left-hand side, I have a very simple Node.js application. Let's start kind of exploring it a tiny bit to understand what's going on in here. So I have an index.js file that contains the Lightrun require statement. We'll talk about that in a moment. But more importantly than that, it contains a Redis client, which is kind of a cache for the game, and a bunch of things that happen using Express for playing with the game. I'm going to pre-open the files that were expected to be open. So I'm going to open them now just so we have everything kind of in front of us. And I'm going to walk you through what happens when I actually make a guess. So let's go into the browser, open the network tools, and look at what happens when I perform a guess. So let's say, for example, I use the word, I actually already put the word break. So let's put the word snack. And when I hit the word snack and I click guess, and the application works okay.
Oh, are we having internet connections again? That's okay, folks, because it's all going to make us stronger. Silent Sounds, I see your question. You want to know whether or not this works with remote Docker containers. I'm going to ask him that when he comes back. So we're going to try to queue up like some other questions. Think of some other questions, folks, that I want to ask him like while he's doing his demonstration, so we can keep this as interactive as possible. Let's see, he's back. You back, Tom?
Yep, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So quick question while you were gone. Silent Sounds wants to know if this works with remote Docker containers.
Oh, definitely. The application has actually two parts. There's the application, there's the remote development extension, and there's also a remote container extension. I think it's under the same, there's different pages for it on the marketplace. You can just look for remote development containers and remote development extension for VS Code, and you should get the guides for each on the same, on the relevant places, basically.
Nice, okay.
Right, let's see. All right, so I'm looking now at the network tools, and I'm going to place a guess on Guessel, I'm going to guess break. And you can see that what happened was I got an API request for /guess. Basically, /guess is the endpoint that does the logic behind the calculation of whether the guess is correct or not. So a good approach would be to look at /guess, exactly what's a look into game logic, and I go and search for guess. You can see there's a route here that gets some information, a request coming into that route, a bunch of error handling code, some cache code, and then interesting logic that happens here. That logic basically tells us that there's a guess variable that is being populated by this make guess function. Don't worry, folks, we'll get back to it. And in addition, I have a bunch of functions here, for example, isGameSolve, that indicates whether the game has finished as concluded, and some response code that sends back the information. Now, in order for us to better understand what's going on inside this application, it's not just enough to look at the code. We actually want to debug this application.
Tom, quick question.
Sure.
Could you zoom in just a little bit for your fonts?
Definitely, for sure.
And
sorry, you're good
now? Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, so continue.
All right, sure. So out of the box, the remote development extension provides a bunch of interesting features that we can use to kind of more ergonomically debug the application. For example, there's a port forwarding feature. Currently running on this machine. Remember, I'm currently SSH connected to that machine. Yeah, sorry?
No, go ahead. Because you cut off for a second, so I was going to like interact with them while you're gone. But I hear you again now. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue. Sure.
So the main the nice feature inside this remote development extension is this port forwarding feature. What it does is it takes the local port 3006 that contains the application and then forwards it to localhost, which should enable me to actually access the machine, the application, from localhost itself. Which is what we see here. This is exactly the same application running here on this remote IP, except it's being port forwarded to my local machine. That means you don't have to deal with IPs and a bunch of different things that might happen when you want to access your application. Sometimes that specific port might not be available for you directly, or you need to access another VPN or something of that sort. The port forwarding feature basically enables you to port forward whatever port you like from that application to your local machine. In addition, if I'm going to kill the application now, I actually have a direct access to the Redis cluster that is behind this machine. So if I have a cache client, you can see in line 41, there's a cache client. I can actually access this server directly. And just to prove to you that I'm not
Just checking to see if he's going to come back.
and you see a Pong there. All right, and you see a Pong coming back. Now, the nice thing about this feature is it enables you to almost get a remote machine on your local machine. It almost feels as if you're working on your local machine. The problem with that is that, again, it requires an SSH connection. And sometimes for production machines specifically, you cannot directly connect to that machine. It's not enabled by some security group, or it's not allowed to you from the security team in your organization, or a bunch of other, you don't have the exact SSH key, a bunch of different problems that might prevent you from working on this machine. Now, I could just open the debugger right here and try and work with it directly on this SSH machine. But in a real life setting, this might not always be available. And we're trying to simulate a production kind of flow inside here. So I'm going to snap out of the SSH session, and instead I'm going to use a different approach called remote debugging. Again, it's a baked-in VS Code feature, and I'm going to use that feature instead of this SSH remote development extension. So I'm going to close the remote IDE, and if you look here on the bottom left, you see this Visual Studio Code, while it looks really similar to the other version, it doesn't actually have an SSH connection to a remote machine. It's the same application, the same Wordle application we've seen before, except it's a local clone of the repo. It's a GitHub repo for Wordle sitting on my machine. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do a remote attach to that remote machine. So if you look here at this launch configuration file, launch.json, this is something that VS Code knows how to auto-generate for you. You don't actually need to generate it yourself. If you go into run, add configuration, what it does, it creates this file for you, and you only have to fill up this information. If you've ever worked with a debugger, it's the same flow, except it directly attached to the remote process. It looks at the node process on the remote machine, directly attaches to it, and works with it. Now, a key networking person might say, wait, but shouldn't I have a port open for that? Because we need the debug port open. Yes, you do. And in order to get that debug port, what we're going to do is we're going to connect to that machine again. And once we do, we are going to rerun the application, except this time we're going to run it with the inspect flag directed back to 0000 with the 3010 port open. When I do that, what happens is the Node.js runtime V8 comes up with the debugger listening on this WebSocket right there, which means that if I approach this machine with 3010 from a Node.js debugger like we have inside VS Code right here, I should, fingers crossed, given today's networking problem, actually attach to the remote machine. Let's try it out. So if I click on attach to remote and I click attach to remote, and we'll see what happens, you can see that this bar turned red. Because this bar turned red, I can now go into a run and debug configuration on the left-hand side and get a debugger view. Just to put things in perspective, what is currently happening is that I have a remote version of Wordle running here on 3006 with port 3010 open for debugging. That means that my VS Code is currently connected remotely to the debugging instance of that application. Now, again, if we go back to what we tried to do before all the shenanigans, what we try to do is to figure out why, when I click March here, instead of actually getting green rectangles, I get yellow rectangles. And what do you do with a debugger? You debug. You place breakpoints inside of the code. So let's get back and do that. If I look at the relevant piece of code, which is, again, inside the /guess endpoint, I'm going to scroll down beneath all of the cache and the kind of error handling logic, and after the make guess function. And I'm going to try and add a breakpoint on line 53. When I add a breakpoint on line 53, what happens stepping through it breakpoint by breakpoint. You can see that it has been registered by this red rectangle here. It's already live. And if I actually do another guess, let's say, for example, I want to guess March and click OK, you can see that the breakpoint was hit. I don't know if you noticed, but I was in the browser and then VS Code snapped back into position, which is a super cool feature. Basically, whenever a breakpoint is hit during your application, VS Code will swap back into position and start show you the exact point in which the application broke. Oh,
That's
yes,
awesome.
very good
Like
sound
that.
effects. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. All right. So to give you a sense of what's going on here, if I look at the data structure for guess, which unsurprisingly is the data structure for the guess word that I just did, you can see that Marsh has been accumulated here in an array with 5 entries, and each entry has a check attribute to it, a property to it, sorry. That check property has a value of, I can tell you that because I wrote the application, I know it, either 0, 1, or 2. A quick look at the code will let us know that the GUI hasn't changed. Now, again, anybody who's ever worked with a debugger knows that this is the actual correct flow for it. If I continue clicking guess, this will not work because the application process has stopped in that breakpoint. I cannot make more guesses inside this application in this context because, again, the application has stopped. Now, to debug this, what I would need to do is add a bunch more breakpoints in different places in the code. And what's going on. That has a bunch of different problems into it. First of all, you'll notice that I'm attached to one machine and not many. You can attach to a few machines in this interface, but again, it is kind of you can attach to a few machines comfortably from this interface. But for each machine, you will have to create a launch configuration. You will have to open a debug port. You will have to ensure that if needed, you're port forwarding the port wherever you need to go, and you'll have to run the application with the -- inspect.
All right, I'm going to ask him to repeat once he comes back
Debug.
on.
Sorry?
It's Tom. Okay, so you cut off for a second.
Yeah.
The last thing we heard you say was dash dash.
Right. So one of the problems with running remote debuggers is that you'll have to use the node -- inspect flag in order to run the application. This is not always the case. You can't always rerun the existing application with a -- inspect flag. And if it is not already running with a -- inspect flag, the remote debugger will not attach. You will need to have that flag in order for the debugger to work. Now, why am I saying all of that and kind of repeating those things that you saw at the table at the beginning? Because the tool that our company built, Lightrun, has a different.
Okay. I'll ask him to repeat again. We should probably turn this into some type of a drinking game every time the internet goes off. Everybody take shots every time the internet goes off. I don't drink. I
Best
take a
things
shot
in
of
slice
water.
bread.
Okay, so Tom, you cut
Yeah.
off for the last 15 seconds. Can you repeat what you just said?
Oh, I had like a little kind of fanboy moment for Tmux, saying that I really adore Tmux and the fact that it enables me to switch between windows really fast. Not related at all to the concept at hand.
Okay.
So
All right.
what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rerun the application that we saw earlier, and I'm going to do it without a -- inspect flag, just a normal run. And I'm going to use the Lightrun plugin, which you will see now right here on the left-hand side. I'm going to use it to connect to that application. And what I should be seeing very soon is, let me just refresh the IDE, the instance. All right. On the left-hand side here, you can see that I have the remote Wordle application currently running remotely. You will soon probably also see the local Wordle application coming up. So the remote Wordle application is that same application we saw earlier, running on 388.68139, except I am currently connected to it via Lightrun. But in fact, I am not directly connected to the application. It looks as if I am directly connected. It feels as if I am directly connected, but I am not directly connected. And to explain what I'm actually looking at here, what the Lightrun plugin on the left-hand side actually is, I need to do a tiny bit of architectural explanation. It's going to take me 30 seconds, I promise, and then we're going to dive right back into VS Code. So I'm going to open up my architecture slide, my very nice and beautifully diagrammed infrastructure slide. Lightrun by itself is a three-tier or three-part machine. First and foremost, you have the IDE client, which is the plugin, you saw it earlier, that creates HTTPS requests to a management server. I don't know if you noticed, but inside the IDE, if you take a close look, I'm actually connected to the remote application. There's authentication between me and that management server. Now,
Nice.
the way it works is I create actions, logs, snapshots, and metrics. We'll see them in a moment. And whenever I do that, an HTTPS request is being carried on to that management server. And then management server is basically a state container. It contains all the state of the system. This management server is hosted by us. We have a version hosted at the app.lightrun.com. And we move between the IDE and that management server using metadata. We basically indicate where a specific action was carried on. Again, in a moment, you'll see exactly what I mean. And then an HTTPS request is being made to that management server. Then on the right-hand side, we have a bunch of agents, which are essentially NPM packages. Each application you run must have NPM, had NPM install Lightrun performed on it before running for like once when we install Lightrun. And once you install Lightrun on that remote agent, what happens is the agent long polls the management server continuously. Every 10 seconds or so, it basically phones home and says, all right, I have now, I want to know if I have some sort of instrumentation to do, any type of real-time instrumentation to do. The benefit of this approach is that the agent needs an outbound port open and not an inbound port open, which reduces a lot of the security risks involved with exposing a debug port or having 22 SSH open to the wide world. And in addition, again, if you take a close look, it will feel as if I'm talking directly to the agent, but I'm actually talking to the management server. There is no direct connection between the developer and the remote machines. I hope that so far it's so good. I don't really want to stick too much to it. If you want to learn more about the architecture, visit docs.lightrun.com. We've got a bunch of explanations there regarding that. And I'm going to jump back right into the idea.
Great. A great segue to ask this question.
Sure.
Overall for Lightrun, what is the pricing model? Paul Watts wants to know. He asked a little bit earlier. I just want to address that question.
Right. So for personal use, we have a free tier that's available for 1 seat and 3 agents. You can use the same experience you'll have now, a fully featured version of Lightrun. You can get it from the website at lightrun.com. It will be, again, fully featured and free with some enterprise features like role-based access control and stuff like that removed from the version. But you will be able to spin up 3 agents, regardless of where they run, a bare metal instance, a Kubernetes pod, a container, whatever. And again, do all of right now with that free tier. If you want to move up to kind of a higher tier of pricing, we have a contact button at the website, and you can again go contact one of our salespeople, and they will help you out with more kind of robust pricing for a larger amount of agents and a larger amount of seats.
Second question by Paul is: any source code transmitted to Lightrun servers? He thinks that might be a security risk.
Excellent question. So the answer is no. We send metadata. In our case, those are identifiers of sorts. We have a way of deciphering where you placed a Lightrun action, which again, we will see in a moment. And what is sent back to the management server is the location, the file name, and the line number. And if you want to add some sort of expression to evaluate or condition, obviously the expression or the condition as well. We have 2 different ways of transferring the information back to you. We can only export it out to the STD out of the application, and then the information emitted back doesn't even travel back to the management server. But if you want to see the information back in the IDE, again, that's just the response, not the actual lines of code that are in front of you. If you want to see the response, then again, you will have to go through the management server and back into the IDE. But no source code, actual lines of source code, are ever transmitted between the developer machine and the production machine. And I don't know if you noticed here, but there's no access to GitHub. There's no repo access. There's no authentication using GitHub, GitLab, anything like that. We do not require source code access. We require you to have the source code so you can place the breakpoints and the snapshots and the logs wherever you want to, but we do not need access to it as a company.
Nice.
I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes. And he thanks us
Excellent.
for asking the question. So,
yep.
Right.
So let's move quickly into.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Reynald.
No, I was saying yes. Let's continue. I was agreeing.
All right, sure. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to place a small log line, which is kind of like doing a logger log or a console log inside the application, but without having to write code or redeploy or push to CI or anything like that. I'm going to go here and open up the log menu for Lightrun. I'm going to place it on the Wordle tag. We're going to get back to what that means in a moment, but keep in mind that this actually means that every running instance of Wordle will now get that log. I'm going to put something interesting here. For example, I'm going to say that /Gessel was hit, and Gessel is Gessel. Now, let's see if that's correctly spelled. Yep. All right. Oh, sorry. Guess is guess. I confused the words. Guess is guess. Right. So what this log line actually means is I have a static part for it. It says /Gessel was hit, guess : is, and inside the curly brackets, I can put any type of JavaScript expression that I'd like. I can put variables like I have here. In this case, it will be an object, arrays, function calls, and so forth, and it will be evaluated and then sent back to me from the runtime environment. Now, the immediate question that I get asked every single time I finish this sentence is two things. First of all, performance, and second of all, state changes. And we have a component inside the Lightrun agent that sits on your application. Again, I remind you that this application was instrumented with Lightrun to begin with. You can see that here. We have a mechanism on that agent that does two things. It rate limits the resources that Lightrun takes. So if, for example, I'm asking to perform an action that consumes too much CPU, RAM, IO, any type of resource that might hinder the application's performance, we block Lightrun from performing. And also, our footprint while creating this is relatively low. You can reach out to our documentation to read a little bit more about those benchmarks. And in addition, every type of action that I make does not change state. So caches will not be changed because of that. Files will not be written to. HTTP requests will not be created. We have a mechanism, part of the proprietary nature of Lightrun, is validating that the action you perform does not change any state. It is a read-only and a performant piece of tooling. And again, if you want to read more about it, we have a very detailed security section on our website. You can feel free to check it out, lightrun.com/security, and that will tell you a little bit more about that. But again, because we're super short on time, I actually want to show you the thing. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see that we have the log message and lifetime. I'm going to click create. And when I click create, the application, the action is going to be invoked. Let's take a look at it now. Sorry, let me see what's going on. You can see the log has been placed right here on the left-hand side. There's a little row thingy, which means that once that finishes invoking, can you hear me well?
Yes. Yes.
All right, sorry, just the music cued in. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to re-invoke this place in the code, basically make a guess, right? And see what happens. And I want to let you in on a little secret. We have this Lightrun console thing here that can accept any incoming log from the application. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my remote application, refresh it. I'm not sure what happened now. I hope the application didn't die on me again. Looks like it did.
That's okay. The audience and I, we're all taking sips of a drink every time the internet goes down. Make this interesting.
It's like a drinking game, except with soda and with code instead of like riddles.
Yeah, the innocent drinking game.
Yep. Sorry about that. So I reran the application and I'm going to run it again. It's going to go live. I don't know if you noticed, but the application went up and down again. Lightrun will kind of identify it in a moment. It will see it here. The remote world application is up. You can see that the action I already placed, despite the fact the application went up and down, the log is still here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke it, basically run something, let's say break, click enter. And if I look at the Lightrun console in a moment, you will see all the log lines streaming into that application. You can see the remote Wordle coming in, which is basically the remote version of Wordle, and the log streaming right into the application right here. Now, you can see that this is exactly the same data structure as I had before, right? The same thing I had from the breakpoint, except I did not break the application, and I didn't have to attach to it directly. And to actually kind of do the debugging now, we'd have to go into a different part of the code because the guess mechanism is actually inside this make guess function. I'm going to go into it, and there's a bunch again of error logic and fun stuff of that sort. And then we have this little conditional thing here. This little conditional, if you look closely at it, looks like it does all the magic for the guessing. It goes through all the game words and then checks whether there's a match between the game word and the guess word. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to place another piece of tooling that we have called a Lightrun snapshot into lines 21, 23, and 25, which are the branches of that conditional. Now, what I did was I put a hit limit of 10 on each of those snapshots, which basically means that I have 10 invocations, 10 reruns of the guess to get before these snapshots expire. All Lightrun actions are ephemeral. They are not expected to stay for eternity. They have a lifetime, usually an hour, 12 hours or so forth. And when they are done, quote unquote, being hit or the lifetime is over, they fade away. So you don't need them anymore. It's a live real-time debugging tool. So I'm going to click quickly.
And just to give you a heads up, where we have like about 13 minutes left, just to, you know, for timing purposes, just to let you know where you're at.
Sure. I'm good. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this, and then we're going to do a summary because, again, we're a bit out of time. So I'm going to create those snapshots just to give you a sense of what's going on here. If you haven't noticed, what I'm doing is I am creating these snapshots inside the VS Code. If you take a good look at what's happening on the left-hand side, both the local Wordle and the remote Wordle applications get those snapshots. They basically get them instrumented. The snapshots are now added. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the application again and put in one of the words that help us debug. For example, March. March is MA, and let's look at what's happening in. If I look at the stats tab, in a moment, those snapshots will be hit. And you can see I have some Lightrun snapshot hits captured. And in a moment, we'll look at what's happening here. This is kind of like a breakpoint, except it does not break. A snapshot conceptually gives you the same information as a breakpoint without breaking the application. So let's very quickly look at which branches of the conditional were hit. First of all, you can see that line 25 was hit. Let's look at it. I can see there are 3 hits here. And if I scroll down inside the variable pane, I can see that I number 4, I number 3, and I number 2 were hit. So this is the 3rd, 4th, and 5th letter of the guess word. And if you look at the guess, you can see that that kind of makes sense. The gray letters, R, C, and H, reach the final branch of the conditional right here. Basically, letter is not included. This makes sense because, again, in Mambo, R, C, and H are not included. But the more interesting bit of logic comes from looking at line 21. In line 21, you can see that I have 2 hits of the snapshot for I number 1 and I number 0, which applies to the first and the second letter of the word. This is the interesting logic. And it was hit on line 21, where the condition says whether the letters are included. And a keen observer might already determine what the bug is. If a letter is matched, i.e. it is in the correct place of the word, by definition, it is included. But the check first checks whether the letter is included and then checks whether it matched. So the logic will never reach the match part. It will always get stuck on the included and will not continue to the next branch. And what we need to do to fix it, I will not do it now, but the easy way to fix it is to swap the condition in 20 and 21 with the condition in 22 and 23. Now, what I'd like to kind of enumerate and explain is what happened here was we instrumented live breakpoints without breaking the application and could run as many queries as we want to that application without having to actually break the application, step in, step out. I think one last thing I wanted to show, but I kind of showed it kind of on the fly, is the fact that Lightrun can be implemented to multiple places at the same time. And I can see people are currently going to the IP address and trying to check a bunch of things, which is pretty cool. Thank you guys for checking. Somebody checked some not a very nice world. Somebody some other person checked hello. It's very cool watching you kind of go and do the application and me getting all the information back into my environment. Keep in mind that this simulates a live application. You guys are, you're all in your apartments, your houses, wherever you are, playing with the game, and I get the information directly to my IDE. This is pretty amazing. This is how you do production debugging in real life.
Nice.
And I want to mention just one last thing. You can see all the actions are being instrumented inside local and remote world. So both of these applications are getting the same logs. And to prove that to you, I'm going to play with the local application. I think I spun it up beforehand. This is running on 308. And I'm going to refresh it. And I'm going to put the word snack here, click OK. And I'm going to look at my console now. And you can see that local world has already got its log in here. So basically, regardless of where your application is running, you can always debug it right here in your IDE without ever leaving it. So I want us to do a quick summary, kind of relate back what we talked about today. So first of all, we had some tiny networking shenanigans that I think we worked around. I hope that you don't mind all of these kind of workarounds. Again, this is a live demo. This is what happens sometimes when you
makes us stronger.
Definitely. So first of all, we tried the remote development extension of VS Code, and we tried basically to debug over SSH. Then we used VS Code's Node.js remote debugging capabilities to debug the application. And then we did kind of a twist on remote debugging, which is live debugging using Lightrun inside of VS Code. I'd like you to take a gander at this table. I mentioned all of those things kind of throughout the session, but if you want, you can always come.
I think he'll come back. Sarumash Pashri, I'm going to ask you a question. We're going to bring him back just, to finish the summary. We almost made it. It's like, is it going to happen again?
I'm here. I'm still here. I promise I'm still here.
Okay.
Did you catch any of that summary at all? Anything?
Oh, we got about half of it. And I was about to ask a couple of questions.
Sure. You mind if I pop over the slide again?
Sure.
Let's do it then. I'm going to share my screen. Our dear Peggy, which tolerates all of my shenanigans, thank you very much for doing all the heavy lifting. All right, talk to me.
So I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Sarupashri Kumaru Guru. She asked, or they asked, what happens to any secrets like API keys? Would those be sent to Lightrun servers?
Excellent question. So as part of our management server, this component that sits in the middle, there's a redaction feature, basically a PII and a blacklist and a bunch of different security features that enable you to block specific types of things from being emitted. There's an administrator of the system. They can decide exactly what and when can be blocked. And if somebody, for some reason, logs a secret, basically echoes or console logs some sort of API key or something like that, the best practice, and we help large organizations implement them themselves. Of course, you can also do that yourself in the free tier. We do this kind of redaction and block listing of the important core problematic features of the application, and we have clients in various different types of more sensitive industries, and by doing this redaction and block listing, we enable them to prevent secrets from being leaked to either us or the developers on the other end.
All right, cool. This has been great. Despite our difficulties, we powered through. So I wanted to do one more Oh, I think Tom's still there, and I hope he could hear me. Producer, is that on our end or is that his internet where he? Okay, there he is. Tom, can you hear me? We're almost
Right
there.
here. I hope that's the last time.
So this is going to be our last
Very close.
segment
Very close.
before
I'm here.
we wrap things up. This is our lightning round, 5 questions. You have 3 seconds to answer each question, so you don't put too much thought into it.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's
that
do
we're
it.
going to do here. So the first question that I have for you, Tom, is what is your biggest pet peeve?
I refactor all the time. Every single line of code I approach, I refactor.
Okay. Scariest thing you've ever done for fun?
I jumped off a 30-meter high cliff in Eilat, which is like Israel's tourist city, into the water, and it was scary as anything I've ever done.
Nice. Do you pronounce it GIF or GIF?
Definitely GIF. Everybody's mistaken all the time.
I don't know about that.
Yes.
All right. But I believe you. What's one VS Code extension you cannot live without?
GitLens.
Good. I'm a big fan of that one. And last question. First guest if you had your own talk show.
All right. All right. We good?
Wait.
Last question. I didn't hear you.
I missed that. We missed the last one. We had one more internet interruption. I think that was your answer. The internet interruption. That would be the guest.
Yes.
First guest if
Yes,
you had your own
definitely.
talk show. All right. Well,
Definitely.
we're gonna use that to wrap it up. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you very much.
All right. I want to ask you. So, if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best handle? Is it what's on the screen right now? Is that your Twitter?
So this one is the Twitter for my company. I follow it and answer questions there too. You can also find me at Tom Granot, exactly my name, two words, just mixed together as a Twitter handle. I'm also on granot.dev. So my personal website is granot.dev. You can reach out to me there. But yeah, Twitter is probably best. Tom Granot.
Excellent. Well, that wraps up our show, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. And again, just as a reminder, if you don't follow us on TikTok, producer, if you could throw up our handles for TikTok and YouTube, please go ahead. And we've got like some interesting videos, just like you saw earlier on the segment. So you could follow us there. And then also on YouTube, where we put out shorts several times a week, in addition to our live stream and some long form videos. All right. So that's it for now. And I will see you guys on the next stream.